So the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths aired over 5 years ago at this point, which is kind of insane to think about, and we've been aware since the immediate months after the episodes aired that a lot of stuff ultimately didn't make it into the final episodes, and this isn't a unique thing, this happens with every TV show, but it's a little bit more interesting with Crisis on Infinite Earths because of what that actually entails. We have things like Michael Rosenbaum being approached to play Lex Luthor in the Smallville scenes and turning it down, that we had full-on attempts to get both Gotham and Krypton involved in the crossover, with Cameron Cuff from Krypton even approached to appear in the Argo scenes, and they were really close to working it out and just couldn't work out schedules, which that would have been awesome to see. There are other smaller things as well from over the years that we found out about, but one thing we actually never got from the crossover, which was a little strange, are any of the deleted scenes in high quality. They were never released on like DVDs or Blu-rays or anything like that. It just kind of felt like they kind of didn't exist in high quality because the weird ripped versions on YouTube that we have just kind of look a little bit strange. Well, after being asked on Twitter about if we'll ever see any deleted scenes, Mark Guggenheim, who was a major writer on both Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow, as well as the main architect behind the TV Crisis on Infinite Earths, he took to his blog last weekend where he didn't just talk about the deleted scenes, he gave us snippets from the scripts themselves, which is really cool. But really quick, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. DC, Marvel, other nerdy videos are non-stop over here, so make sure to hang out for a bit. But Guggenheim talked about two scenes in particular, and those two scenes were focused on Nash Wells, aka Pariah, and then Oliver Queen and his transformation to the Spectre. Now, the Nash scene would have taken place during the first 10 minutes of the very first episode, during the destruction of Argo, which that would have been the same scene that Zor-El from Krypton's cameo would have been in. But this scene is described by Mark as one of only two scenes that were excised entirely, as there were no other full scenes that ended up on the cutting floor. He says this scene has Pariah witnessing the destruction of Argo City, and within the scene we have a hooded figure walks between the fleeing citizens. Reverse shot, it's Pariah, once Nash Wells. He looks tortured, talks to an unseen force as if to talk to a god, and then Pariah says, "This is no reward, this is punishment, these aren't victories, damn it, these are tragedies. Innocent people are dying." So this scene feels like it's ripped almost straight from the comics. The original Crisis on Infinite Earths run has Pariah being forced to witness the destruction of each Earth in the multiverse. He's dragged to each one by the Anti-Monitor and has to bear witness. One of the biggest moments in the comic is the destruction of Earth 3 with the Crime Syndicate of America, and Pariah watches it all unfold. And this scene on Argo feels like it would have been that scene, but adapted to make sense for the crossover since we don't have Earth 3 in the Arrowverse. I would have really liked to see this scene, honestly. I hope they release it at some point. It seems really cool, and since this scene was cut, the first time we see Nash in part 1 of the crossover isn't until the final scene of the episode, where he just sort of appears to watch Oliver die, and I always personally felt like his appearance there didn't work crazily well and should have been his second or third scene of the episode to really establish him as Pariah and his connection to all of this before that scene, and this scene would have cleared that up a little bit more. Honestly, just based off the dialogue, I feel like this scene could have been my favorite Nash or Pariah scene in the crossover. It sounds really tragic and dark and a little depressing for the character, and I can only imagine the sort of performance and weight that Tom Cavanagh would bring to this scene. That would be so exciting to see. The next scene would have been at the very end of part 3 and focused on Oliver. Guggenheim says this is a much harder scene to cut, and it was a tag at the end of episode 3 which saw Oliver Queen turning into the Spectre. Now this scene somehow ended up online at some point between the end of Crisis and now. It's been on YouTube for like 4 years, but it's in really low quality, the audio isn't very good. It's actually kind of even hard to make out what Oliver says, so it's cool to have the script to sort of clear that up. The script has the scene as starting at the very end of the final scene of part 3, the scene being the characters ending up in the vanishing point while Lex uses the book to replace Kingdom Come Superman with himself. We get Lex's line of, "So, what do we do now?" And then off our heroes as they realize no one knows and they are completely fucked. We cut the titles, Crisis on Infinite Earths, but wait, we're not done yet. Exterior, Lian Beach, day, Purgatory Day 1. Find Oliver standing before a fire. Jim Corrigan watches as the fire's colour changes to green. Oliver is transformed. A montage of quick cuts, a green glove is pulled onto his hand, a green sleeve falls down his arm, a green hood covers his head, a long green cloak flutters in the wind. Then Oliver speaks where he says, "We have failed the multiverse, hundreds of billions of lives lost, and I can hear their souls now crying out in despair." Close on Oliver's face as he turns, Oliver Queen has become something else. He is now the Spectre. And Oliver finishes on, "They shall have vengeance." Now Mark follows up by saying it was an important and critical scene, but the quality of the finished scene as shot was inversely proportional to the importance, and that to him it came out really poorly. Now like I mentioned earlier, the scene is somewhat available on YouTube, but it's kind of hard to judge it because deleted scenes are almost always in pretty bad condition in terms of VFX, audio, soundtrack. Like deleted scenes pretty much never look how they should or how they are supposed to look. The version on YouTube has some very quick edits with some really subpar sound mixing. The score they use is just likely the exact same piece of music from the end of Arrow Season 2. The track's called Never Again and plays when Oliver leaves Slade in his cell, while Slade screams, "I keep my promises, kid." Which again, makes sense that they just reused music for a test cut of the scene. The score throughout Crisis on Infinite Earths is so orchestral and new, and it feels expensive, and so it is noticeable to not have that present here. Besides this, we do have the "they shall have vengeance" bit of dialogue, which is the bit that I mentioned is a little bit hard to make out, but the rest of the dialogue is not present in the scene at all. The audio does cut in and out quite heavily during the scene, so my reading of this is that this would most likely have been a voiceover during the montage of him putting on the Spectre costume, and the audio cutting in and out signifies that this is where the dialogue voiceover would have went. It also would mean that this is probably recorded on a stage or set somewhere instead of on location like the rest of the scene. Now I completely get Mark's decision to cut the scene if it wasn't coming out as planned. Even just in college we dealt with that where a scene would have been in the script and it was so integral and important, but once we filmed it and started editing it, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel great, this doesn't work how I imagined it to work. And then you have to make that difficult decision of if the scene is important enough that it being bad doesn't matter, or is the scene bad enough that just having it in here will lower the quality of the overall project more. So I completely get Mark's decision to cut it if it wasn't working out. And honestly, just based off of the YouTube scene, I don't think it's terrible. I think it's got very noticeable issues, but all of those noticeable issues are just based off the fact it's a deleted scene and a lot of it wasn't finished. I feel like if more time was spent on it, it would have been an alright scene, it would have fit in, but hey look, that's completely his decision. In terms of if I would have wanted this scene to be included, one of my major complaints for the overall crossover is I've always felt it did do Oliver Queen a little dirty. Now I know he's meant to die during the crossover and I would not change that at all. That is one of the most important parts of the crossover and it's one of the most important parts of Arrow as a show. I would not change that. But I've never loved the idea of killing him in the very first episode and then having him barely be present for the rest of the crossover, and when he is present it's as this god figure that isn't like Oliver at all. I think him becoming the Spectre is an unusual decision on its own, to be honest. I'm not sure if Oliver suits that role, never overly loved that, but if he has to become the Spectre, I'd still have Oliver around properly for the first 3 episodes, then maybe kill him, then do Spectre in episode 4 and 5, and if doing that though, you'd really have to rejig the format of episode 5 to work with this, since episode 5 was kind of an epilogue. And I think seeing this scene properly would have been really cool because it would have just been another scene with Oliver in some form, plus the "they shall have vengeance" line is really cool. But I think this scene in general is still tied to what some of my fundamental issues with the crossover were, which is their handling of Oliver and the Spectre. Regarding if these scenes will ever be released properly, Mark said it's entirely up to Warner Brothers. While they had almost released the scenes in a theatrical showing of Crisis on Infinite Earths, that would have been in March 2020, right when COVID started to hit the United States, so obviously it couldn't happen. Now, being completely honest, it's a little hard for me to get excited or even upset about this theatrical announcement for one reason, and that reason is I'm in Ireland. There's no way a Crisis on Infinite Earths movie release would have happened outside the United States. So reading this, I'm like, that sounds awesome, but they definitely would not have went to the effort to, like, you know, put this in Dublin or something like that. Like, that was never going to happen. Like, there was no way people worldwide were ever going to see this. So it's kind of hard for me to feel sad that I never got it, because the likelihood is that I was never going to get it in the first place, even in a non-COVID world. But this would have been really cool for everyone who would have been able to see it. They were going to add the deleted scenes in with some completed VFX, color grading, sound mixing. Sounds like it would have been awesome, as well as some bonuses between episodes. Now, the bonuses between episodes surprises me because personally I would have loved to see them do a proper full 3-hour cut of Crisis that had the titles and credits taken out and that the episodes sort of flow into each other like it was a proper movie, but it does not feel like that's what they wanted to do here. It feels like with this release it was much more kind of the episodes on their own with little bits in between. Overall though, this sounds very familiar to the re-releases of Avengers Endgame and such, where they added extra deleted scenes or trailers and bonuses to make people want to go to see the film again. Now the unfortunate truth is that I don't think there's any world where this full release ever happens outside of like maybe a one-off fan event in a very specific cinema somewhere. But Crisis was during the absolute height of the popularity of the Arrowverse. You had so many people who were not Arrowverse fans checking out the cameo scenes on YouTube, talking about it. Like for a brief time in December 2019 and January 2020, it felt like the Arrowverse was this phenomenon just taking over Twitter and nerd spaces. It was really exciting for us. Like, it was like, oh my god, the Arrowverse is big for once. Like, people are talking about it who never talk about it. And for once, they're not talking about it in a negative light. These people are hyping it up. That's so exciting. And I feel like this would have been the absolute best and maybe only time you could have released this if you wanted to do it and make any kind of money, because as soon as Crisis was over, the Arrowverse popularity started declining heavily, even Arrowverse fans started dropping off, and by Flash finished season 9, it was at an all-time low, and then it concluded anyway. I think it would be a very, very hard sell to get non-Arrowverse fans to go see any sort of release of this stuff in cinemas today. That's unfortunately a fact, I think. But that's all of the new information we found out about Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, I wouldn't mind doing a full breakdown at some point on everything that we know was cut from the crossover, because back when the first Krypton Gotham stuff came out, I did do a video talking about it all, but there's been tons more stuff then that it would be fun to just kind of talk about everything in one video. It was also just really fun to talk about the Arrowverse again after so long. I've missed this, but how do you feel about these cutscenes? Do they sound exciting? Sound terrible? Would you have went to see an Arrowverse movie event if they had released it? Let me know, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, maybe consider liking, subscribing, sharing it with someone you think might like it. All of that. Thanks for watching, and have an amazing day.